I'm never quite sure this early in the morning, it is kind of early, if you are very fresh or if you are still asleep. So I'm going to endeavor to be interesting. Failing that, I will endeavor to be animated and loud. You choose whatever works best for you at 8:30 in the morning. So about my title, probably if I had done this in 2015, I would have paid lip service to right-wing anti-Semitism on campus, but it certainly wouldn't have figured into the title. But we're in a different time now, and I felt that if I was going to talk in a more holistic sense about anti-Semitism, that I needed to talk about both the left and the right, and to do it in 20 minutes. Here we go. There we go. So, assumptions and questions, these are some of the things that I'm starting with. First of all, we know that the American Jewish community has shown varying interest in anti-Semitism on campus, really beginning after 1967, but for the most part, the phenomenon that I'm looking at is really since the start of the Second Intifada. And when they talked about anti-Semitism on campus, it was generally about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism emanating from the progressive left. However, especially since the 2016 election, which is something else that I'm assuming, anti-Semitism from the far right has started to consume more of the oxygen in that space. Now, don't get me wrong, the Jewish community obviously was always looking at anti-Semitism that emanates from the right, but it was perhaps more muted, and also very importantly, campus administrators know how to deal with and how to respond to, for the most part, a swastika on a building or something that emanates from the far right. They are often not as effective in dealing with Zionism is racism posters that emanate from the left. So perhaps for that reason, while the Jewish community and others could track it, they might not have been as consumed by it. However, I have two new questions given this different climate that we now have. And this is what I was thinking. What attributes, if any, does the far right share with the progressive left on campus? And beyond that, how does either this confluence or this disparity affect expressions of anti-Semitism on campus? And the reason why I want to look at it like that is because of the charge of this conference, which is how do we look forward, and rather than recording and documenting, which is part of the issue, how do we begin to formulate strategies to deal with these issues? So, I came up with something pithy, the 4 T's plus 1 of radical campus politics. I'm sure it will stick in everyone's mind. First of all, most importantly, transgression. And that's probably where I'm going to spend most of my time in this talk. But there are other factors as well. The next T, and we must talk about President Trump. I try to do it in the most apolitical way possible. That's the last fight that I want to have right now. But certainly the election of the current president has had an impact on campus politics. Next, we need to deal with the issue of truth. And I'm so lucky that Kerry Nelson does my work for me, because that's exactly what he's talking about. And this, for me, is probably the most important of these different points of this generating framework, but might be the one that I get to spend the least time on because of Kerry's incredible work. We also need to talk about technology, the internet, social media. This is all very important and figures into the way that the media delivers the message. This totally ruins my 4 T's. Purity, in that I'm talking about ideological purity, and I didn't know what to do with this until I turned to the Hebrew and came up with taharanut. Now, I am a Hebrew speaker, not a very good one anymore because I've lived there in a long time. I know there are Hebrew speakers sitting in the audience that are now fuming and saying, you've translated this wrong. Well, let me tell you, I consulted with 2 Hebrew speakers. This is the word we came up with. If you are indignant about this choice, please do not take up the question and answer session, but I promise to stand around after the question and answer session, and you can bludgeon me with whatever you want. But for today, taharanut. Okay, so now that I've got all my ground rules out of the way, let's really get started. By the way, one of the things I forgot to bring up, because I'm all nervous and up here, is that what we should keep in mind, part of the reason why I need to talk about rightist anti-Semitism, is that the ADL Center on Extremism has continued to track white supremacist propaganda on campus, and you should know that the 2017-2018 data shows a 77% increase of incidents from the previous academic year, with 292 cases reported compared to 165 in 2016, 2017. So if there's any doubt that we should also be including the right in our analysis, I think that the figures speak for themselves. So, again, now, ground rules out of the way. I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is a classic alt-right flyer. There have been many of them that have appeared on a variety of campuses. This one appeared in October 2018 at Roanoke College. What it is referencing is, of course, the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And as you can see, the indignation is coming from the fact that here is a perfectly nice white man who was accused of sexual assault earlier in his life. And of course, this became a main focus of his confirmation hearings. But this is problematic because, again, he's a perfectly nice white man. And in an era when we are talking about white identity politics, this is problematic. So there's Brett Kavanaugh, and there are the Jews and their stooges right behind him. You see that some of them are marked with Magen David, and others are marked with Good Goy. So everything, all of these progressive influences are clearly the work of the nefarious Jewish puppet masters. And this was brought to you courtesy of a terrific group, Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi group currently run by Andrew Anglin. I suggest that if you want to have a depressing evening, go home and look at some of their material. What can we tell you about the alt-right? First of all, my take on the alt-right is that it's really not very different from the non-alt-right. It is a loose assemblage of Christian identity groups, neo-Nazi groups, Klan-leaning groups, patriot militia groups. But alt, what does the word alt do? It makes them seem edgy and current and young and connected to the internet. And also, in a certain sense, it adds a little bit of intellectualism to them, believe it or not. For those of you who remember the rise of Holocaust denial in this country in the 70s through the 90s, the Institute for Historical Review tried something very similar. They were going to be an academic organization, pseudo-intellectual in its own way, and you referenced pseudo-intellectuals on the left, and this was a way of changing the image of someone who's racist and anti-Semitic from a rural, uneducated, stumbling person from flyover country to someone who was erudite, someone who was learned, someone who was an intellectual. So alt, it's the same ideologies in different clothing. The other thing that we must keep in mind is what unites these groups. They are misogynist, they are racist, they are homophobic, they are also anti-Semitic, and their emphasis is often on white supremacy, white nationalism, and promoting white identity politics. One of the problems with that is that one of the main faces of the alt-right in this country is Richard Spencer. You might know him that immediately after the Trump election, he was seen saying, "Hail Trump," and there were people in the audience that certainly responded to that with the appropriate salute. Richard Spencer, however, I believe he was a doctoral student at Duke for a while before he dropped out. But he is trying to put a youthful intellectual spin on the right wing, and a disturbing part of his rhetoric is that he refers to white identity as a positive force, in part by saying that all he really wants is a version of white Zionism. So you can see the problems that this can create farther down the road. He also went on an aborted campus tour within the last year, where he was much like another speaker that I'm going to refer to later, Milo Yiannopoulos, where he met with opposition not only from the campus, certainly also beyond the campus. And his speaking tour was not as successful, because the alt-right at this point, this is very important, this flyer at Roanoke College, it may have been distributed by a student, we have no way of knowing. However, it clearly is a phenomenon that comes from off-campus at this point. The alt-right is not something that feels as dangerous and internal to academia. There's another group that does, and I'll talk about that in a moment. One thing to remember, too, about the alt-right is that they do quibble a bit about Jews. There's a minority of those on the alt-right that will confess that Jews do have an element of whiteness to them and might even be part of a larger white umbrella, but they are very rare. For the most part, Jews are puppet masters. Jews are the head of Zog, Zionist-occupied government in this country, and they are also the organizers of the New World Order. What else can I say about these fine individuals? Their relationship to President Trump. I am not in any way saying that Trump is a member of the alt-right. I want to make that clear. Talk a little bit later about how some of the ways that he expresses his views perhaps lifts some taboos and allows others to express similar or worse taboos. So many of the alt-right, they're not necessarily Trump supporters. They appreciate the way he's opened up some cultural avenues for them. I think one of the things that mars the idea of Trump being a leader for them is that his beautiful Aryan-looking daughter is actually married to a Jew. That's probably not helpful. But some of them, too, think that Trump is actually making deals on the surface with mainstream conservatism, cuckservatives as they're called, because they are conservatives who have been cuckolded, emasculated by American culture. And some of them think that while he's doing this on the surface, underneath, he's working against the deep state so that there might be several different levels. This is classic conspiracy theory. Now again, I want to stress that campus manifestations of the alt-right come from off campus. However, we need to take a look at the alt-light. And the alt-light is an associated phenomenon, and probably one of the purveyors of this that will spring to mind is Milo Yiannopoulos, who also indulged himself between 2015 to 2017 on his Dangerous Faggot tour, where, among other things, he enlightened us all with the idea that feminism is cancer. Milo, however, has a point, and it's a point not only made by him, but also echoed by people who examine this phenomenon. Angela Nagel, in her book Kill All the Normies, and Peter Nywert, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, in Alt America. And what they talk about is that the appeal of the alt-light is the concept of transgression. And this turns the old 60s paradigm on its head, and this is very important. Today, on campuses, I'm not talking about out in what we'll call the real world. Campuses are not a microcosm in this country of the larger world. They are, in fact, what I might call an alternate universe or an alternate reality. And on the campus, the hegemonic view, if you will, even though they're portrayed as not being in any way hegemonic, is politically left orthodoxy, shall we say. So the alt-light is a way to react against that, to be transgressive. And Milo nails it, saying that today's youth are drawn to it because they don't want to be under any kind of, they don't want to be subject to any kind of speech codes. They don't want to be under any sort of orthodox thought system. Instead, we might, and probably Milo might like this, compare him to the transgressive humor of, say, a Lenny Bruce. A little frightening to think about it, that Lenny Bruce on campus today clearly would not work. Many comics today say that they won't go to campus because the students can't hear transgressive humor anymore. So to stand in for that, you have the alt-light. Now let me describe a little bit what the alt-light is. Their main, I think one of the main reasons that they arose, again, is to poke and needle at that politically correct leftist culture, dominant culture on campus. They often are misogynist. If anyone has followed Gamergate, incel culture, involuntary celibates, all of these, and it's of course it's a very male-dominated culture, but it does have female adherence as well. The alt-light just exists to be ironic, to poke fun at things, to laugh at things. But the question that Angela Nagel and others have asked is the alt-light actually a gateway to the alt-right? Because there can be permeable lines. Just as Leonard Zeskind asked in the early 00s if the extreme right wing was influencing our conservative right, if there was a permeable line between what was permitted and what wasn't, we need to ask the same thing about the alt-light, and that's crucial for campuses. Because if these are young students are indulging in this transgressive behavior and are exposed to alt-right ideas, that's one way that they begin to sneak onto campus. And Milo himself also attempted a campus tour. You probably remember the riots at University of California, Berkeley when he tried to speak. But Milo would call himself, he would turn himself on the fringes probably of the alt-right, but he flirts with that harder-edged anti-Semitism and racism, etc. Even though he doesn't seem like a good candidate for the alt-right, he's gay. He says that he has Jewish heritage, he's of Jewish heritage. However, he recently, this summer I believe, trolled a Jewish journalist by sending her $14.88. What is $14.88? 14 is a mantra that talks about the 14 words of assuring a future for white children. 88 is shorthand for Heil Hitler. So certainly there's a permeability between those ideas, and that could have an effect on campus. It hasn't seemed to hit Jews as much, and the alt-right might express some white identity politics, but is not as focused on the overt white supremacy and white nationalism. So it's lurking in the corner, it's a potential danger. But this is what I find interesting, and this is what I want to show you. This is a recent poster from Tufts University. Think about what was seen on Roanoke College, and then take a look at this. That's it? Man. The alt-left, well, not the alt-left, but the anti-Israel left also uses a certain kind of imagery. You can see that Amerikaners with the KKK destroy Israel apartheid forces. So while the left is supposed to be against transgression, what we can learn from this is that both of them use similar tactics, or actually they might be more oppositional tactics, but they come to a similar conclusion. Really quickly, I would talk about President Trump. That's an easy one. Clearly the right and left disagree on how they feel about President Trump. But the problem is that the perceived cozying up or friendship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, what that has done is it has given fodder to the left. So even though the right and left are opposed on Trump, there is a consequence from that. And a recent article in the last couple of days in the JTA says 300 Jewish millennials say that Netanyahu's actions are making their jobs more difficult on campus, essentially, as progressives. So take that for what you will as a political statement, but clearly the differing stances on Trump have repercussions for how we deal with anti-Semitism on campus, just as how we deal with transgression has differing repercussions. Technology, this is another one. This is from 1999. This is Ken Stern. At the time when the internet was maybe not in its infancy, but it's in its toddlership, Ken Stern realized that sometimes diametrically opposed ideologies, black nationalism, white nationalism, could be connected through how they reacted to Jews, and particularly through Holocaust denial. So this is from 1999. We are now more sophisticated. You could probably connect radical Islamism into this as well. But one of the questions we might ask with technology, because both the extreme right and extreme left are effective users of technology and social media, can we connect them? And does that change the way that we combat them or stand against them, their use of technology, and how Jews play into that? Oops, we want to get there yet? Well, okay. So beyond technology, one of the next T that I had to deal with is truth. Carrie, as I said, did my job for me by talking about how the left plays fast and loose, certainly with the truth in an academic sense, and how that affects campus. We all know that the right has a history as well of playing fast and loose with facts. That's where we get the idea of alternative facts. So what you have is two extremes that are challenging the concept of truth. And that's actually one of all of the T's, this is the most difficult. It has impacts for our society. It has serious impacts for the campus, not only in scholarship, but certainly in how we teach and talk to students as well. Are there standards? Are there norms that we are supposed to adhere to as academics with the administration, with the faculty, and with students? One of the issues with truth is how permeable that can become as well. So if I had time, I would take you back to the 90s when Bradley Smith and his Committee for the Open Debate on the Holocaust wanted to publicize Holocaust denial in student newspapers. And many, even if they were in fairly liberal universities and the editors were liberal students, many newspapers made the decision to publish Bradley Smith's advertisements challenging the Holocaust and Holocaust denial. And this is problematic because they did this on the basis of free speech, even though that might not have been fact-based. You also have a problem in the 90s with black nationalists that were positing in the 90s that Jews were almost solely responsible for the transatlantic slave trade. And they were supported in that by white liberals because they were speaking as part of the oppressed minority. So with truth, we see confluence. We see where both the right and the left are playing with facts and how that can lead to a similar outcome. One of the other things I wanted to talk about with truth, just one other thing to keep in mind, that Karen was talking about truth in academia, where you can also trip up the alt-right and the alt-left, well, particularly the alt-left, is they lie about the actions of other professors. So Indiana University published a book by Doron Ben Atta and Andrew Pessin that shows that students and faculty both lie about the motivations and the actions of pro-Israel or pro-Zionist professors. I would recommend that you read the section on Shlomo Dubnov, where you can see that the progressive left attacked him, but their own videos proved that they were not being truthful about his actions as a pro-Zionist, pro-Israel professor. Okay. Purity, again, just for a very quick moment, both sides, and this could be their downfall, are committed to ideological purity. It plays out in different ways. The right is often more devoted to presenting a united front. What we know is that behind the scenes there are many squabbles. At the Institute for Historical Review, there was once an incredible argument about the placement, I think, of a semicolon that ended in accusations of homosexuality and Jewish heritage. So clearly, and you can see in the headlines today, that there are many fallings out within the alt-right universe, but this also happens in the alt-left, or it's not the alt-left, excuse me, the far left, with call-out culture. Recently, Chelsea Clinton was called out for her statements about Ilan Omar. The students, NYU students who did the calling out, actually, and probably not coincidentally, also authored the recent NYU BDS resolution. So what we know is that there is this culture, the left is much more into, in their ideological purity, pushing out there for everyone, public shaming, to try and make everyone conform to a certain standard. Well, I've not done any of this justice, I'm sure, but I would like to conclude with another danger. If I had more time, I suppose I would have expanded on the fact that looking at these 4 T's, we can see where the far right and the far left share tactics, where they are as confluence and where they diverge, and that that can affect the way that we react to it, whether the outcomes of that confluence or divergence are similar outcomes or different ones. And one of the issues that we need to keep in mind too, and this has been brought up before, is that wow, it's hard to go this fast. Is that the left and the right each tend to ignore the anti-Semitism, the racism, and the problems inherent on their own side, but they also ignore it in other sides. So in this example, once again, the National Women's Studies Association put out a letter after Charlottesville, after the far-right marches there, and this is the original copy of it. You will see that there is not a single mention of anti-Semitism or Jews. And I've highlighted the area where it would have been very simple to slot that in. After protests, this is how it was changed. And I'll give them points, I'll give them props that they actually did try to change this, and they tried to recognize the problems that attacks on Jews and anti-Semitism were part of that. However, they had to be reminded. So they can't recognize their own anti-Semitism, but problematically they can't recognize it sometimes on the other side as well, specifically on campus. And that in itself should influence the way that we study this. And I would end with saying we need to study both extremes in tandem in a holistic way. We cannot study them apart from each other, or we will have no effective way to combat them. Thank you.